The alarms blared, red lights flashing as the spaceship shook violently. The man gripped the armrests of his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been through rough landings before, but this felt different. The ship was breaking apart, and the sound of metal screeching filled the air. He closed his eyes, bracing for impact. Then, everything went black. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the ground, his body aching. The air smelled strange, sweet and metallic at the same time. He groaned, pushing himself up slowly. His vision was blurry, but he could see the wreckage of the ship scattered around him. Smoke rose from the broken pieces, and the silence was deafening. He looked around, trying to make sense of where he was. The sky was a deep shade of purple, with two suns shining brightly. The ground beneath him was covered in glowing plants that pulsed softly, like they were alive. He had never seen anything like it. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. As he stood up, he noticed movement in the distance. Figures were emerging from the wreckage, walking toward him. His first instinct was to hide, he didn't know if they were friend or foe. But as they got closer, he realized they weren't human. They were women, but unlike any he had ever seen. Their skin shimmered in the sunlight, some with shades of blue, others with hints of silver or gold. Their eyes were large and expressive, glowing faintly. They wore simple, flowing clothes that seemed to blend with the environment. One of them stepped forward, her long hair cascading like liquid silver. She tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. She didn't speak, but her eyes seemed to convey a sense of calm. Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The alien woman didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward the wreckage, then pointed to herself and the others. It was clear, they were survivors, just like him. As more of them gathered around, he counted about 20. Each one was stunningly beautiful, but there was something else about them, a sense of mystery, as if they carried secrets he couldn't yet understand. One of the aliens reached out and touched his arm gently. Her hand was warm, and for a moment, he felt a strange connection, like she was trying to communicate without words. "We're stranded, aren't we?" he said, more to himself than to them. The aliens nodded, their expressions a mix of sadness and determination. They began to move around, gathering supplies from the wreckage. The man followed their lead, his mind racing. He had no idea where they were or how they would survive, but one thing was clear, they were in this together. As the group worked, a low rumble echoed in the distance. The man froze, looking toward the horizon. The sound was deep and ominous, like something massive was moving. The aliens stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" he whispered. No one answered. The sound grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. The man's heart raced as he realized they weren't alone on this planet. The part ends with the group staring into the distance, unsure of what's coming next. The mystery of the planet deepens, leaving the audience eager to find out what happens in part 2. The rumbling stopped as suddenly as it had begun. The man and the alien women stood still, their eyes scanning the horizon. The glowing plants around them pulsed faster, as if reacting to the sound. The air felt heavier, charged with tension. One of the aliens, the one with silver hair, stepped forward and gestured for the group to follow. She moved with purpose, her steps light and graceful. The man hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust her. He had no other choice. They walked away from the wreckage, carrying whatever supplies they could salvage. The man noticed that the aliens moved in perfect harmony, as if they could sense each other's thoughts. They didn't speak, but their gestures and expressions were enough to communicate. The landscape was unlike anything he had ever seen. The ground was soft, almost spongy, and the glowing plants stretched as far as the eye could see. In the distance, towering rock formations rose into the sky, their surfaces smooth and reflective. The two suns cast long shadows, creating an otherworldly glow. After walking for what felt like hours, the group reached a small clearing. The silver-haired alien raised her hand, signaling for everyone to stop. She pointed to a cluster of trees with large, fruit-like objects hanging from their branches. The fruits were bright orange and emitted a faint, sweet smell. The man watched as one of the aliens plucked a fruit and held it out to him. Her eyes were kind, encouraging him to take it. He hesitated, unsure if it was safe to eat, but his hunger got the better of him. He took a small bite, and the taste was surprisingly refreshing, sweet and tangy, like nothing he had ever tasted before. "Thank you," he said, nodding to the alien. She smiled, a small but genuine expression that made him feel a little more at ease. As the group rested, the man tried to make sense of their situation. They were stranded on a mysterious planet with no way to call for help. The alien seemed to know more about the planet than he did, but they couldn't communicate with words. He needed to find a way to understand them better. He noticed that the silver-haired alien was watching him. She seemed curious, almost as if she was studying him. He decided to try something. "My name is," he began, pointing to himself. The alien tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. He repeated the gesture, hoping she would understand. After a moment, she pointed to herself and made a soft, melodic sound. It wasn't a word, but it was clear she was introducing herself. "Okay," he said, nodding. "Nice to meet you." The other aliens began to do the same, each making a unique sound as they pointed to themselves. The man tried to mimic the sounds, which made them laugh, a light, musical sound that echoed through the clearing. As the suns began to set, the group decided to set up a makeshift camp. The aliens used their knowledge of the environment to create a shelter using large leaves and branches. The man helped as best as he could, feeling a sense of camaraderie growing between them. That night, as they sat around a small fire, the man noticed something strange. The glowing plants around them seemed to pulse in rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The aliens didn't seem surprised, as if this was normal for them. "What is this place?" he whispered to himself. The silver-haired alien sat beside him, her expression thoughtful. She pointed to the ground, then to the sky, and finally to the group. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a deeper meaning. They were all connected to this planet in some way. The man felt a sense of awe and unease. There was so much he didn't understand, but one thing was clear: this planet held secrets, and they were only beginning to uncover them. The part ends with the group settling down for the night, the glowing plants pulsing softly around them. The mystery of the planet deepens, and the bond between the man and the aliens grows stronger, setting the stage for the next part of their journey. The next morning, the group woke up to a strange sight. The glowing plants around them had changed color overnight, shifting from soft blue to a vibrant green. The air felt different too, crisper, almost electric. The man stretched, his body still sore from the crash, but he felt a renewed sense of determination. They needed to find answers, and fast. The silver-haired alien, who the man had started to think of as Silva, gestured for everyone to follow. She led the group toward the towering rock formations they had seen the day before. As they walked, the man noticed that the alien seemed more alert, their eyes scanning the surroundings as if they were expecting something. After a few hours, they reached the base of one of the rock formations. Up close, the rocks were even more impressive, smooth and glassy, with faint patterns etched into their surfaces. Silva placed her hand on the rock, and for a moment, the patterns glowed faintly. "What is this?" the man asked, more to himself than to anyone else. Silva turned to him and pointed to a narrow opening in the rock. It looked like a cave entrance, but there was something unnatural about it. The edges were perfectly smooth, as if they had been carved by advanced tools. The group hesitated at the entrance, the darkness inside seeming to stretch endlessly. Silva stepped forward, her glowing skin providing just enough light to see. The man followed, his heart pounding. He didn't know what they would find, but he knew they had to keep moving. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp. The walls were covered in more of the glowing patterns, which pulsed faintly as they passed. The man felt a strange sensation, like the cave was alive and watching them. After walking for what felt like an eternity, they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room was a pedestal, and on top of it sat a glowing object. It was small, about the size of a fist, and emitted a soft, golden light. Silva approached the object cautiously, her eyes wide with what looked like recognition. She reached out and touched it, and suddenly, the chamber lit up. Holographic images appeared in the air, showing a map of the planet with a single location marked in bright red. The man stared in awe. "What is this? Some kind of map?" Silva nodded, her expression serious. She pointed to the marked location, then to the group, and finally to the sky. The message was clear, this was where they needed to go. As the group studied the map, the man noticed something else. The holographic images also showed scenes of an ancient civilization, tall, elegant buildings, advanced technology, and beings that looked similar to the aliens but more evolved. The images flickered, showing the civilization's downfall, with explosions and chaos. "This planet, it wasn't always like this, was it?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Silva's expression darkened. She pointed to the glowing object, then to the map, and finally to herself and the others. It was as if she was saying, "This is our history." The man felt a chill run down his spine. The aliens weren't just survivors of the crash, they were connected to this planet in a way he couldn't yet understand. Before they could discuss further, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The holographic images flickered and disappeared, and the glowing object dimmed. The man heard a low, rumbling sound coming from deeper within the cave. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. Silva nodded, grabbing the glowing object and tucking it into a pouch at her side. The group hurried back the way they had come, the tremors growing stronger with each step. By the time they reached the entrance, the cave was shaking violently, and rocks began to fall from the ceiling. They burst out into the open air, just as the entrance collapsed behind them. The man gasped for breath, his heart racing. "What was that?" he asked, looking at Silva. She didn't answer, but her expression was grim. She held up the glowing object, which was now pulsing faintly, as if it had a life of its own. The man realized that their journey was far from over. The map had shown them where to go, but it had also revealed a deeper mystery, one that could change everything they thought they knew about the planet, and themselves. The part ends with the group standing at the edge of the cave, the glowing object in Silva's hand pulsing softly. The mystery of the planet deepens, and the stakes grow higher, leaving the audience eager to find out what happens next. The group stood at the edge of the collapsed cave, the glowing object in Silva's hand casting a faint golden light. The map had shown them a destination, but getting there wouldn't be easy. The man looked at the horizon, where the marked location lay. It was far, and the terrain between them was unpredictable. "We need to move," he said, turning to Silva. She nodded, her expression determined. The other aliens gathered around, their eyes reflecting the same resolve. They had a goal now, and that gave them purpose. The journey began with cautious steps. The landscape was strange and ever-changing. At times, they walked through fields of glowing plants that swayed gently in the breeze. Other times, they crossed rocky plains where the ground was hot to the touch. The two suns beat down on them, but the aliens seemed unaffected, their glowing skin adapting to the heat. The man, however, struggled. His human body wasn't built for this environment. He felt the weight of exhaustion and the sting of thirst, but he pushed on, determined to keep up with the group. Silva noticed his struggle. She slowed her pace, walking beside him. She reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out one of the orange fruits they had found earlier. She handed it to him, her eyes filled with concern. "Thank you," he said, taking the fruit. He bit into it, the sweet juice refreshing him instantly. As they walked, the man tried to learn more about the aliens. He pointed to different objects, rocks, plants, the sky, and asked Silva to name them in her language. She would make soft, melodic sounds, and he would try to repeat them. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The group reached a wide river by midday. The water was crystal clear, with a faint blue glow. The aliens knelt by the edge, cupping the water in their hands and drinking. The man followed suit, the cool water soothing his parched throat. But as they drank, the water began to ripple. At first, it was subtle, but soon the ripples turned into waves. The man stood up, his heart racing. "What's happening?" he asked, looking at Silva. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his arm and pulled him back from the water's edge. The other aliens did the same, their eyes fixed on the river. Suddenly, a creature emerged from the water. It was massive, with long, tentacle-like limbs and a body covered in shimmering scales. Its eyes glowed a deep red, and it let out a low, guttural sound that sent chills down the man's spine. "We need to go now," the man said, his voice trembling. The group backed away slowly, but the creature wasn't interested in them. It slithered onto the shore, its movements slow and deliberate, and disappeared into the glowing plants. The man let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "What was that?" Silva shook her head, her expression unreadable. She pointed to the river, then to the path ahead, as if to say, "We need to keep moving." The rest of the day was uneventful, but the encounter with the creature left the man on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The aliens, however, seemed calm, as if they were used to the planet's dangers. As the suns began to set, the group found a safe spot to rest. The aliens used their knowledge of the environment to create a shelter, while the man gathered firewood. The glowing plants provided enough light, but the fire gave him a sense of comfort. That night, as they sat around the fire, the man noticed Silva staring at the glowing object. It pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat. "What is that thing?" he asked, pointing to it. Silva hesitated, then handed it to him. The moment he touched it, he felt a strange warmth spread through his body. Images flashed in his mind, scenes of the ancient civilization, their triumphs and their downfall. He saw the aliens, but they looked different, more advanced, as if they were part of something greater. The vision ended as quickly as it began. The man gasped, dropping the object. What was that?" he asked, his voice shaking. Silva picked up the object, her expression solemn. She pointed to herself, then to the other aliens, and finally to the planet. It was clear, the object was connected to their history, and it held the key to understanding their journey. The part ends with the group sitting in silence, the fire crackling softly. The man's mind raced with questions, but one thing was certain, they were getting closer to the truth, and the journey ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The next morning, the group set out early, their spirits high despite the challenges ahead. The glowing object in Silva's hand pulsed more intensely as they neared the marked location on the map. The terrain became rougher, with jagged rocks and steep cliffs, but the aliens moved with ease, their glowing skin illuminating the path. By midday, they reached the top of a hill, and the man gasped at what he saw below. In the valley stood a massive structure, unlike anything he had ever seen. It was made of the same smooth, glassy material as the rock formations, but it was clearly artificial. The structure was shaped like a pyramid, with intricate patterns carved into its surface. At the top was a large, circular opening that glowed faintly. "This is it," the man said, his voice filled with awe. Silva nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and apprehension. She held up the glowing object, which was now pulsing rapidly, as if it recognized the structure. The group made their way down the hill, their steps quickening as they approached the pyramid. Up close, the structure was even more impressive. The patterns on its surface seemed to shift and change, as if they were alive. The man reached out to touch the wall, and a sudden warmth spread through his hand. The patterns glowed brighter, and a low hum filled the air. "It's reacting to us," he said, pulling his hand back. Silva stepped forward and placed the glowing object into a small indentation on the wall. The moment it clicked into place, the entire structure came to life. The patterns glowed brightly, and the circular opening at the top emitted a beam of light that shot into the sky. A hidden door slid open, revealing a dark passageway. The group hesitated, unsure of what lay inside. "We've come this far," the man said, taking a deep breath. "Let's see what's in there." Silva led the way, her glowing skin providing light as they entered the structure. The walls inside were covered in more of the shifting patterns, and the air was cool and dry. They walked through a series of corridors, each one more elaborate than the last. The man noticed murals on the walls, depicting scenes from the ancient civilization. He saw the aliens, but they looked different, taller, more advanced, and surrounded by technology he couldn't even begin to understand. One mural caught his attention. It showed the aliens standing around a large, glowing object, the same one Silva now carried. The object was connected to a machine, and beams of light were shooting out of it, reaching into the sky. "What is this?" the man asked, pointing to the mural. Silva studied it for a moment, then pointed to the object and made a sweeping gesture with her hands. It was as if she was saying, "This is what we were meant to do." The group continued deeper into the structure, eventually reaching a large chamber. In the center of the room was a machine, similar to the one in the mural. It was massive, with intricate parts that glowed faintly. Silva approached the machine and placed the glowing object into a slot at its base. The machine hummed to life, and holographic images filled the room. The man watched in awe as the images told the story of the ancient civilization. They had been a peaceful, advanced society, thriving on the planet for thousands of years. But something had gone wrong, a catastrophic event that caused the planet's core to become unstable. The civilization had tried to stop it, but they had failed. The final image showed the aliens fleeing the planet, their faces filled with sorrow. "This is your history," the man said, turning to Silva. "You're the descendants of that civilization, aren't you?" Silva nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. She pointed to the machine, then to the glowing object, and finally to the group. It was clear, they had come here to finish what their ancestors had started. But before they could do anything, the ground beneath them began to shake. The machine's hum grew louder, and the holographic images flickered. "What's happening?" the man asked, his voice filled with panic. Silva's expression was grim. She pointed to the machine, then to the ground, and finally to the sky. The message was clear, the planet's core was becoming more unstable, and they were running out of time. The part ends with the group standing in the chamber, the machine humming loudly and the ground shaking beneath their feet. The stakes are higher than ever, and the audience is left on the edge of their seats, eager to find out what happens next. The ground shook violently, and the machine's hum grew deafening. The man steadied himself against the wall, his heart racing. Silva and the other aliens were frantically working on the machine, their glowing hands moving over its intricate controls. "What's going on?" the man shouted over the noise. Silva turned to him, her eyes filled with urgency. She pointed to the machine, then to the glowing object, and finally to the ground beneath them. The message was clear, the planet's core was becoming unstable, and the machine was their only hope of stopping it. The man rushed to her side, trying to understand what she was doing. The machine's controls were covered in symbols he didn't recognize, but Silva seemed to know exactly what to do. She pressed a series of buttons, and the machine's hum grew louder. Suddenly, the holographic images returned, showing the planet's core. It was a swirling mass of energy, but cracks were forming, and molten lava was beginning to seep through. The core, It's breaking apart, the man said, his voice filled with dread. Silva nodded, her expression grim. She pointed to the glowing object, then to the machine, and finally to the group. It was as if she was saying, "We need to activate this, or everything will be destroyed." The man understood. The machine was designed to stabilize the core, but it needed the glowing object to work. The problem was, the object was also the key to something else, something the aliens had been hiding. As Silva worked, the man noticed something strange. The other aliens were standing back, their expressions filled with sadness. One of them, a younger-looking alien with golden skin, stepped forward and placed her hand on Silva's shoulder. Silva turned to her, and for a moment, they shared a silent conversation. Then, the younger alien nodded and stepped back, tears glistening in her eyes. "What's happening?" the man asked, his voice trembling. Silva took a deep breath and pointed to the glowing object, then to herself. She made a gesture that the man had come to understand meant sacrifice. "No," he said, shaking his head. "There has to be another way." But Silva's expression was resolute. She pointed to the machine, then to the planet, and finally to the group. The message was clear: activating the machine would save the planet, but it would cost her life. The man felt a lump in his throat. He had grown close to Silva during their journey, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. But he also knew they had no choice. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you need me to do?" Silva pointed to a lever on the machine. She mimed pulling it, then pointed to the glowing object. The man understood: he needed to activate the machine once the object was in place. Silva placed the glowing object into the machine's core, and it began to glow brighter than ever. The machine's hum reached a crescendo, and the ground shook even more violently. Silva turned to the man and gave him a small, sad smile. Then, she stepped back and gestured for him to pull the lever. The man hesitated, his hand trembling. He looked at Silva, then at the other aliens, who were watching him with solemn expressions. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. He pulled the lever. The machine roared to life, and a beam of light shot out of the top of the structure, reaching into the sky. The ground stopped shaking, and the holographic images showed the planet's core stabilizing. But as the machine worked, Silva began to glow brighter and brighter. Her body started to dissolve into light, her form fading away. "No!" the man shouted, reaching out to her. But it was too late. Silva gave him one last smile, and then she was gone. The machine fell silent, and the chamber was filled with an eerie stillness. The man fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The other aliens gathered around him, their expressions filled with sorrow. The younger alien with golden skin placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. The man looked up at her, his heart heavy. Why did she have to do that? The alien pointed to the machine, then to the planet, and finally to Silva. It was as if she was saying, "She did it to save us all." The part ends with the group standing in the chamber, the machine silent and the planet saved. But the cost was high, and the man is left grappling with the loss of Silva. The audience is left on the edge of their seats, eager to find out how the story will conclude. The chamber was silent, the machine's hum now a distant memory. The man sat on the floor, his head in his hands, still processing Silva's sacrifice. The other aliens stood around him, their glowing skin dimmed with grief. The younger alien with golden skin, whom the man had started to think of as Aura, knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "She's gone," the man whispered, his voice hollow. Aura nodded, her eyes filled with sadness. She pointed to the machine, then to the planet, and finally to Silva. The message was clear: Silva had given her life to save them all. The man took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He knew they couldn't stay here. The planet was stable for now, but the structure felt like a tomb, a reminder of what they had lost. "We need to get out of here," he said, standing up. Aura and the other aliens nodded, their expressions shifting from sorrow to determination. They had come this far, and they couldn't give up now. The group left the chamber and made their way back through the corridors of the ancient structure. The walls still glowed faintly, but the pattern seemed dimmer, as if the life had been drained from them. When they reached the entrance, the man was surprised to see that the landscape had changed. The glowing plants were brighter, and the air felt fresher, as if the planet was healing itself. "The machine worked," he said, looking at Aura. She nodded, a small smile forming on her face. But her smile faded as she pointed to the sky. The man followed her gaze and saw something that made his heart race, a ship, hovering in the distance. "Is that yours?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Aura shook her head and pointed to the ground, then to the structure behind them. It was clear, the ship was part of the ancient civilization, hidden away for emergencies. "We need to get to it," the man said, his determination returning. The group set off toward the ship, their pace quickening as they navigated the rough terrain. The journey was difficult, but the aliens moved with purpose, their glowing skin lighting the way. As they got closer, the man realized the ship was massive, much larger than he had initially thought. It was sleek and silver, with intricate designs etched into its surface. It looked ancient but functional, as if it had been waiting for them. When they reached the ship, Aura placed her hand on a panel near the entrance. The panel glowed, and a door slid open, revealing a dark interior. The man hesitated, unsure of what to expect. But Aura stepped inside, her glowing skin illuminating the way. The others followed, and the man took a deep breath before joining them. The interior of the ship was unlike anything he had ever seen. The walls were lined with glowing panels, and the air was cool and clean. Aura led the group to a control room, where a large console sat in the center. She placed her hand on the console, and the ship came to life. The panels lit up, and a holographic display appeared, showing the planet and the surrounding space. "Can you fly this thing?" the man asked, looking at Aura. She nodded confidently, her hands moving over the controls. The ship began to hum, and the man felt a slight vibration beneath his feet. But just as the ship was about to lift off, the ground outside began to shake. The man looked out the window and saw cracks forming in the earth, molten lava bubbling to the surface. "The core, it's still unstable," he shouted. Aura's expression turned grim. She pointed to the controls, then to the ship's engines. It was clear, they needed to leave now, or they wouldn't make it. The man rushed to help, pressing buttons and flipping switches as Aura directed him. The ship's hum grew louder, and the vibrations intensified. Outside, the ground was collapsing, the cracks spreading rapidly. The ship began to lift off, but the shaking made it difficult to stabilize. Come on," the man muttered, his hands gripping the console. Finally, the ship broke free from the ground, rising into the sky just as the earth below erupted in a massive explosion. The man watched through the window as the planet's surface was consumed by fire and lava. The ship soared higher, leaving the chaos behind. The man let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, his body trembling with relief. But their journey wasn't over yet. Aura pointed to the holographic display, which showed a course plotted through space. The ship was heading toward a distant star system, one that the man didn't recognize. "Where are we going?" he asked. Aura pointed to the star system, then to herself and the other aliens. It was clear, they were going home. The part ends with the ship traveling through space, the planet fading into the distance. The group has escaped, but the man is left wondering what awaits them in the star system, and what role he will play in the aliens' future. The ship glided smoothly through space, the stars outside the window forming a glittering tapestry. The man sat in the control room, watching the holographic display as Aura guided the ship. The other aliens were scattered throughout the ship, their glowing skin providing a soft light in the dim interior. Despite their escape, the mood was somber. Silva's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone, and the man couldn't shake the feeling of loss. He looked at Aura, who was focused on the controls, her expression unreadable. "How long until we reach your home?" he asked, breaking the silence. Aura pointed to the holographic display, which showed a countdown. They had a few hours left before they reached the star system. The man nodded, leaning back in his seat. He felt a mix of emotions, relief that they had escaped the planet, but also anxiety about what lay ahead. He didn't know what to expect when they reached the aliens' home, or if he would even be welcome there. As the ship traveled onward, the man noticed something strange on the holographic display. A small red dot appeared, moving rapidly toward them. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the dot. Aura's eyes widened, and she quickly adjusted the controls. The holographic display zoomed in, revealing a massive asteroid hurtling toward the ship. "We need to move," the man shouted, his heart racing. Aura worked frantically, her hands moving over the controls. The ship veered to the side, narrowly avoiding the asteroid. But as they passed it, the man saw something even more alarming. The asteroid was surrounded by smaller debris, and the ship was heading straight for it. "Brace yourselves," he yelled, gripping the console. The ship shook violently as it collided with the debris. Alarms blared, and the holographic display flickered. Aura struggled to stabilize the ship, but the damage was too severe. "We're losing power," the man said, his voice filled with panic. Aura pointed to a section of the ship, then to the man. It was clear, he needed to go there and fix the problem. The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He rushed out of the control room, following the glowing panels that lined the walls. The ship was shaking so much that it was hard to keep his balance, but he pushed on, determined to help. He reached the engine room, where sparks were flying from a damaged console. The man didn't know much about alien technology, but he could see that a power conduit had been severed. He grabbed a tool from the wall and began working, his hands trembling as he tried to reconnect the wires. Back in the control room, Aura was doing everything she could to keep the ship on course. The holographic display showed the star system getting closer, but the ship was losing altitude rapidly. The man finally managed to reconnect the wires, and the ship's hum returned. He let out a sigh of relief and rushed back to the control room. "I fixed it," he said, panting. Aura gave him a grateful nod, her hands moving quickly over the controls. The ship stabilized, and the holographic display showed that they were back on course. But their relief was short-lived. The red dot reappeared on the display, this time much larger. The man's heart sank as he realized what it was, a second asteroid, even bigger than the first. "We can't avoid it," he said, his voice filled with dread. Aura's expression was grim. She pointed to the ship's weapon system, then to the asteroid. It was clear, they needed to destroy it. The man hesitated. He had no experience with alien weapons, but he knew they had no choice. He stepped up to the weapons console, his hands shaking as he pressed the buttons Aura indicated. A beam of light shot out from the ship, hitting the asteroid dead center. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the asteroid exploded, sending debris flying in all directions. The ship shook again as it passed through the debris field, but Aura managed to keep it steady. The holographic display showed the star system just ahead, its planets glowing brightly. "We made it," the man said, his voice filled with relief. Aura nodded, a small smile forming on her face. But her smile faded as she pointed to the ship's power levels. They were dangerously low. "We're not out of the woods yet," the man said, his heart sinking. The part ends with the ship approaching the star system, its power levels dwindling. The group has overcome countless challenges, but their journey isn't over yet. The audience is left on the edge of their seats, eager to find out how the story will conclude. The ship's power levels were dangerously low, and the man could feel the engine straining as they approached the star system. Aura worked tirelessly at the controls, her glowing hands moving swiftly over the console. The holographic display showed a planet growing larger, a vibrant world with swirling blue and green hues. "Is that your home?" the man asked, his voice filled with awe. Aura nodded, her expression a mix of relief and anticipation. But the ship's alarms blared again, reminding them that they weren't safe yet. "We're not going to make it," the man said, his heart sinking as the power levels dipped into the red. Aura pointed to a lever on the console, then to the planet. It was clear, they needed to activate the ship's emergency landing protocol. The man hesitated, unsure of what to do. But Aura placed her hand on his, guiding him to the lever. Together, they pulled it. The ship shuddered violently as it entered the planet's atmosphere. The man gripped the console, his knuckles white, as the ship descended rapidly. Outside the window, the sky turned from black to a fiery orange, and the ship's hull groaned under the pressure. "Hold on," the man shouted, though he knew the aliens couldn't understand him. The ship broke through the clouds, and the man caught his first glimpse of the planet's surface. It was breathtaking, lush forests, sparkling rivers, and towering mountains. But there was no time to admire the view. Aura guided the ship toward a clearing in the forest, her hands steady despite the chaos. The ground rushed up to meet them, and the man closed his eyes, bracing for impact. The ship hit the ground with a deafening crash, skidding across the terrain before finally coming to a stop. The man opened his eyes, his body aching but unharmed. The ship was battered and smoking, but they had made it. "We're alive," he said, his voice trembling with relief. Aura nodded, a small smile forming on her face. The other aliens began to gather in the control room, their glowing skin dimmed but their eyes filled with hope. The group made their way out of the ship, stepping onto the planet's surface for the first time. The air was fresh and sweet, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled the air. The man looked around, marveling at the beauty of this new world. Aura stepped forward, her eyes scanning the horizon. She pointed to a distant mountain, where a cluster of glowing structures could be seen. It was clear, that was their destination. The journey to the structures was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had endured. As they walked, the man felt a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. He thought about everything they had been through, the crash, the planet's mysteries, Silva's sacrifice. It had changed him in ways he couldn't fully understand. When they reached the structures, they were greeted by more aliens, their glowing skin shimmering in the sunlight. The newcomers embraced Aura and the others, their expressions filled with joy and relief. The man stood back, unsure of his place in this new world. But Aura turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She pointed to him, then to the structures, and finally to the sky. It was as if she was saying, "You are one of us now." The man felt a lump in his throat. He had lost so much, but he had also gained something priceless, a new family, a new purpose. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the man sat on a hill overlooking the structures. Aura joined him, her presence comforting. "Thank you," he said, though he knew she couldn't understand him. Aura smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. She pointed to the sky, then to the ground, and finally to him. The message was clear, they were connected, not just to each other, but to the universe itself. The man realized that this journey had taught him something important. Life was unpredictable, filled with challenges and loss, but it was also beautiful and full of hope. He had learned the value of courage, teamwork, and love, and he knew that no matter where he went, he would carry those lessons with him. The story ends with the man and Aura sitting together, watching the stars appear in the night sky. The journey was over, but a new chapter was just beginning, one filled with endless possibilities. Life lesson. The story teaches us that even in the face of unimaginable challenges, we can find strength within ourselves and in the connections we make with others. Loss and hardship are part of life, but they can also lead to growth, hope, and new beginnings.